So hello good people of the internet, this is Tommy Kelly and this is the next episode of the book club in which we are reading The Invisibles by Grant Morrison. And for this round we were to read the Arcadia storyline. And as I mentioned in the last episode, when I read this originally first, it's where I found it very hard to get through and I stopped on the first round. Obviously didn't read it subsequently later, but it just stopped me in the tracks. I didn't enjoy it, I found it boring, not hard to follow, but just I wasn't interested in it. And reading up it seems I wasn't alone in this. At this point in the original run, the sales dropped dramatically and people just kind of went that, this isn't what we thought it was, this is it hadn't lived up to its promise and all this kind of thing. And I think possibly one of the reasons is that it kind of becomes very much a fair-to-go comic at this point. There's huge elements of Sandman in it that probably isn't needed so much, but maybe they were trying to develop a house style or something like that. But so yeah, we just kind of quickly go through it because as if you haven't read it yet, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I also have to get through it. So it starts with Byron and Shelley, and all of these things I have zero interest in. This entire scene and this entire storyline I just didn't care for at all whatsoever. Then we have King Mob kind of talking about Ganesha, so why not? And then you have Dane being trained in the Kung Fu by Boy and doing the yoga and stuff like that. And at this point then we have King Mob travelling back to London via the future and meets a woman who's had a one-eyed baby and stuff like this. And this is like a kind of a future where it all has gone horribly wrong or whatever. So Grant Morrison was asked, is this the actual future or what is it? And this is just a representation, so it's kind of like, the subconscious stuff again. Then we have the first appearance of Orlando coming in, who takes skin and ice cream from a man and family in Park. So then we have Drunk Dane, we have the return of King Mob, all fairly stuff. And then this whole thing of the painting, the Arcadia painting, Arcadia ego, so in paradise, in utopia, I am. And that painting itself, if you ever get into any kind of alternative history type stuff, comes up an awful lot and that kind of things, and people wonder what it means, what it's all about. It's, is it a sign? Is it pointing at something? Could be just a painting with an interesting name. The windmill thing, the time travel thing, where they enter the Matrix and they go backwards in time to France. One thing I also want to point out about this thing is I don't particularly like the artwork. I don't like it as much as Steve Yell's. In places it's good, and in other places it's just so weird that proportions seem terribly wrong. As if some of it she's doing by reference and some she isn't, and you can kind of tell when she's not. Like that last panel, that's pretty poor, in my opinion. I'm not saying I'm the greatest artist in the world either, but I don't know, it looks wrong. Anyway, the next chapter then continues in Paris and the guillotine and all this stuff. And then that's obviously that big line when King Mob and the group turn up after just being summoned by a guy. And somehow it's always a surprise when it actually works, and the whole thing about magic. And that is very true in real magic too. Then, if you haven't read much comics, you wouldn't probably know that the bracket, the sort of triangle, not the pointy bracket rather than square bracket, means it's been translated. It's one of those things that if you don't read comics, you probably wouldn't know, and you're going, what is that? So in this case, it's French. Then it goes through where we meet Mary Shelley of Frankenstein fame. And one of my pet peeves of comics is when they start doing the stuff in handwriting rather than block capitals or whatever, and it's impossible to read. I find it very hard to concentrate on it. It makes it really hard work for me, and 90% of the time when I see handwritten stuff like that, like cursive stuff in comics, I just don't read it. In this case I forced myself to read it for this particular video. but I'm pretty sure that any other time I've read The Invisibles, I've never read that. And it turns out I wasn't missing much anyway. Now, here we have the first appearance of the never named, but always present Satan, or Lucifer. And we know this because he hands her an apple, and you know, he may have done that before in the past somehow. So yeah, Orlando's going crazy around the place. They're still in France. And then we have the whole, these guys. And we have the Marquis de Sade, who is the person that they are going to, Invisible's going to rescue. Interesting conversation between Satan and Mary Shelley, and then King Mob turns up just at the last minute, as is his special ability, it seems, in The Invisibles, and rescues the Marquis de Sade, and he's having none of it. So they then try to return to the windmill, and they get separated. King Mob and Boy end up in, and the Marquis de Sade end up in like an idyllic kind of countryside thing. Dane and Fanny end up back in the windmill, but kind of semi-unconscious, and Robin goes her own way. So I think this is the issue. Yeah, 120 Days of Sodol is obviously the reference to 120 Days of Sodomy. Now, this issue has been the most kind of editorial input of all of the Invisibles to date, and I think overall there was lots of stuff changed, but not dramatically. It was kind of the big idea, and the big problem was that all of these kind of debauchery scenes in the original book are done to children, and obviously DC or Vertigo at the time didn't want, you know, it to be children in the comic because they thought that was very distasteful or whatever, and to change it to Lost Souls. And Grant Morrison's kind of saying that, well, that's fine, but it's kind of taking away, the whole point is that this is horrible and being done to children, and Lost Souls kind of diminishes that. Then there's the cutting off the finger of Dane by Orlando, which is part of the, like, the hero's journey thing that happens. Like, you've seen it in Empire Strikes Back with the hand being removed, Luke's hand being removed. You know, it's part of the destroying the hero, as it may, you know, the Joseph Campbell hero thing. Also happens in Them by an amazing artist and author who you might know. So then the, you know, the fight between Orlando, Fanny, and then all, you know, this whole kind of subconscious. So the King Mob and Boy and Marquis de Sade end up in the subconscious, and I think it probably is the Marquis de Sade subconscious, but it could be a general thing. And it is the kind of idea of what would happen if materialism run this course. It's not materialism, rationalism completely happens. And of course, in this case, it's disgusting and people do whatever they want. With the point being that if it's just rationality, then why not do all these things, kind of thing. And this is where you have all the Lost Souls kind of stuff. I'm not sure I care. Not, you know, it's not that I find it shocking or not shocking enough or any of that stuff. It's just I'm not tremendously sure what point has been made. So if you know what point has been made, then let me know. Then we find out that Ragged Robin has arrived at a church, which is Rennes-le-Château, and again we have the Lucifer character there playing chess. And this is an interesting kind of scene. I enjoyed this in that just how calm and collected and cool of a character that Ragged Robin is. Supposedly the look of Robin is based on the artist Jill, but she kind of denies it, but is, or at least not necessarily the look, but the actual character, because they did go travelling, like Grant Morrison and her and a couple other people around this time of when The Invisibles was being created. So yeah, come back then to the debauchery and all that kind of stuff. It's where it all lost me. So then Mary Shelley arrives in Venice, and then we're back to the Orlando fight, and then all this kind of cool stuff. Has this happened yet? No, not yet. Not the cool stuff hasn't happened yet. Then we get to the Rennes-le-Château. Rennes-le-Château is again one of those things, if you're into kind of alternative history, not necessarily alternative history because it's actual history, but conspiracy history if you want, and it's a very interesting story. I know Rennes-le-Château really, really well because of Gabriel Knight tree in which you have to go around it, so that's kind of fairly accurately based on the place, seemingly. And then we come to John the Baptist head. The head of John the Baptist. That which the Templar Knights, that's the secret of the Templar Knights. Now this, and in this issue, this reminds me of this very Alan Moore Watchmen, which you can even tell by the layout, which Watchmen's all done in 9 panels, but this is in 6. It has that kind of a feel. But it also reminds me an awful lot of what Bendis did subsequently in Powers. He has an awful lot of this kind of characters talking to the screen as if they've been interviewed on TV. So basically, yeah, they're right back in normal time, and the Marquis de Sade is going that, oh well, everything that I predicted as fantasy, or went through as fantasies, actually become real. Ragged Robin goes through a thing with John the Baptist and finds out that it's John the Baptist, the words, the sounds that he makes, everyone hears them differently, and it says everyone hears the thing they need to hear, but what it actually probably is everyone hears what they want to hear. And so therefore the head of John the Baptist is totally useless. Orlando gets a bit more powerful with Dane. Dane kind of steps up his game, and then Fanny does her thing, which is great, where she starts calling in, the South American gods. Goes back to Shelley and Lord Byron. No interest there. And there's a nice little thing in this where Orlando goes, "How do you know these names?" when Fanny is calling out all the the different god names. And these are old names from an earlier son, which just a nice little kind of allude. And yeah, so then when Robin comes back out of the church, the Rennes-le-Château, and gets talking to Lucifer again, it's kind of go through the thing that it's the language of aliens to speak, that they're speaking in tongues, and let me see, there was something I wanted to point out about this. So it's the voice of the unconscious mind, and everyone hears it, interprets it differently. Everyone hears what they need to hear, is what Lucifer says. Where Ragged Robin would say everyone hears what they want to hear, which is it's very different. It's a very different thing, but no matter being so similar. So that's interesting to see there. Then Dane goes insane. He's still angry young boy, and says he's quitting the Invisibles, which is again part of the hero's journey, but he's kind of done that bit already. And it ends where we see that the Marquis de Sade is now setting up his own kind of cell, or his own kind of sect of the Invisibles. And yeah. So, for me, not as interesting, although there's parts of it that's really good. Like the whole kind of time travel thing is interesting in that kind of what's the imagination, the Jung's thing, active imagination sense of doing that as a group. And the thing where King Mob says that people can see us, but because we don't fit into their time, the brain will adjust it so that we just look like normal people, which is a thing brains do. And you hear loads of stories of primitive people not being able to see ships over the horizon because they don't know what ships are. Then you also hear stories that that's totally not true or whatever, but as an example, it's kind of a good example whether it's true or not. And that whole thing of like that if you show primitive people paintings, this also may not be true, but it's something I've heard many times, that they can't understand it. It just looks like colours to them because they don't understand perspective, they don't understand pictures or whatever. Maybe that kind of thing where your brain will normalise the thing, which is a thing that happens in magic all the time. And I've said it before, that as soon as you magic for something, your brain will normalise it so that it doesn't seem like magic, and it's a thing to be careful of. And Aunt LaVey would always say to make sure you acknowledge the magic because it continues to magic, and I've talked about that ad nauseum. So I want to hear what you thought about this. Did you enjoy it? Did you like the Lord Byron Shelley stuff? Did you like the interplay between Mary Shelley and Lucifer or Satan? What about the John the Baptist thing and the talking, the subconscious stuff? There was 2 different types of subconscious voices coming from John the Baptist, and the subconscious that King Mob Boy and the Marquis de Sade, the inside What about that whole issue with all the debauchery and the kids and the lost souls and the censorship? And that influences different things. Like, it seems more like a Vertigo title, like almost like this could be a Sandman, fit more in the Sandman universe, but not really either. There's kind of as if there's approaches towards that, but not really. And yeah, so general thoughts on this and what you think. Now the next chapters, before I go, will be the next 4 issues or so. So to the end, so it'll be 23 Things Fall Apart, Seasons of Ghouls, Royal Monsters, and Best Man Fall. And that will be then complete the entirety of the first kind of book. So it's the next 4 things. But because it's Christmas and the holidays and that kind of stuff, we'll wait till the new year before we put up the thread about it. But if you want to read it over Christmas, it's the next 4 issues that we're going to be doing in the next thread or whatever. After that, we're going to be doing Ramsey Jukes' SMOBTE, if I have that right. And but I'll talk more about that as the time comes. So yeah, let's hear what you have to think about this bit, likes, dislikes, all of those things. And I'll talk to you all soon.